Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So draw up your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater. Welcome to the first ever episode of Beyond the Breakwater. I am Lindsay Smokovitz, and with me today I have Senior Pastor of Messiah Church, Executive Director of Elevate Community Ministries, and Executive Director of Gateway. Welcome, Ed Dorner.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Great to be here.
Yeah, we've been wanting to start this podcast for a long time.
We've learned a lot, and I think it's time to really share it with the world.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear kind of where you started. I threw out there your senior pastor, executive director of a couple different things. So just walk the listeners through, where did you start and what brought you here?
Well, it goes back to 2008 when I felt like God was calling us to come to Midland, Michigan. And my family's from Chicago area. That's where I came from. And I just remember having this conversation with God that if you're going to call me away from our family, from the place that I grew up, and from everybody that we had known, if you're going to call us to another place, let's do something really big. Let's do something God-sized, that God would show himself so real and do things that only he can do, so that at the end of the day, everybody would know it was only God that did it. And so it's been the most amazing 15 years that I think I've ever seen. So
if you had to summarize what it is God has brought you here to do, explain to the listeners what that looks like.
Well, simply there's 7 needs in a community: housing, transportation, food, childcare, jobs, healthcare, recovery. And never did we ever imagine that we would be doing those things. We didn't know where God was going to be leading us. And over the course of these 15 years, God gave us opportunities to do something in all of them, and really significant things in all of those. And so it's been fun to be a part of, an automotive garage starting up, a coffee house on Main Street, an appliance store, early career education, a grocery store, healthcare. We could never have envisioned or imagined this, but I think what we've learned in the process, we have so much that we can offer churches, and not just churches, but businesses and agencies, and how we can serve them and how we can help them so that they could do amazing things that we could have only dreamed about.
So that became a church that started all of these.
Yeah, that's what's crazy. But when you think about the church, it was back around 1900 and in the 1800s, churches started the hospitals that we still have today. And so churches have done extraordinary things over the years, but it seems like over the last 100 years, churches have been really quieted down, and you don't hear churches doing a whole lot of things besides church. And we're just looking at a model from the 1890s. And it's amazing how to see what churches were doing back in the 1890s, and we're doing those things now. And we're just watching how this is impacting incredible lives.
Yeah, I think that is a perfect segue into kind of Beyond the Breakwater and the title of our podcast. You and I had sat down for hours, several days, several meetings, just brainstorming, what do we name this podcast? And just nailing it down to those 2 words of Beyond the Breakwater. So paint the picture real quick of kind of how that parallels the story of Messiah Church and starting these ministries, serving the community. Where is this podcast going, and what can listeners expect to take away from it?
Yeah, that's great. If you think about, we're from Michigan, so we're surrounded by the Great Lakes. And if you go by the Great Lakes, you see some days it's really wavy. Whenever the wind is over 10 miles an hour, it is super wavy. And for the first time ever, I've taken a boat onto Lake Michigan, my own boat, and I don't have a big boat. And those waves get wild. And so a breakwater is the transition from the high seas through a breakwater, which is like a big pier, into the channel, which is where, say, the river or inland. And it's a simple analogy, but I think churches have come into the harbor and never left, and they're in the harbor. But it's beyond the breakwater. That's where people need Jesus. That's where we're finding a lot of people that they don't know Jesus. They don't know how to find him. They're not willing to just show up in a church. They don't know where to look. And the church, instead of going out beyond the breakwater, they're staying in. They're huddling. And I think the more the churches huddle and they're wondering why they're declining, it's because they're not anywhere near people that don't know Jesus are. And so Beyond the Breakwater is really getting past our comfort zone into the open seas. This is really scary out here. We don't really know how to do this, but that's where the people are. That's where the people are that are just longing to hear about Jesus, know about Jesus, experience his love. And so it's just a great analogy that we get to use. And we're going to come back to this analogy because there's so many things we can build around it. And I think everybody has to kind of like, if you get the image, you'll understand everything we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think we're talking to churches, but we're also talking to business owners, nonprofits, individuals, right? Like, how can this apply to the business owner, to the entrepreneur, to the nonprofit worker?
I think we're in the most, I don't want to say frightening because it's not frightening with God, but I think we're in the most interesting time because every business has to risk in order to survive and thrive. Some do, some don't. Kodak didn't make the change and folded. Kmart folds. Sears folds. Amazon flourishes. What's the difference? Everybody's in a season now that if you don't take a risk, you're probably going to just vanish. And it happens rapidly. Churches have never had to risk. Churches have been just put a shingle out, new church, people show up, you have a thriving church, church grows, awesome. Not today. Not today, not at all. Churches are struggling. They don't know what to do. They've never really had to go out beyond the breakwaters because there's so many people around them. Now, if they choose to stay in the harbor, they're going to close. They have an expiration date. And I think that's what most churches are coming to grips with, is that there's an expiration date on their church. Unless you risk and get beyond the breakwater and go seek out people that are not part of the church, if you don't do that, well, you're expired. It's just a matter of time before you just close your doors. And I've been a part of a church that closes doors. It's not fun. In fact, I was brought in to close a church, but then start a new church with a new model, risking, going after people who don't know Jesus. And it's different. And so I think churches are like, what do you mean we have to risk? We've never done this before. You don't have to, but just know that you're going to die.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I think that is a great summary of what we're going to be sharing in Beyond the Breakwater. And I'm super excited to get into more episodes to pick your brain about your experience. But there's something we want our listeners to do before they go. So what is that, Ed?
Well, I think my favorite place is South Haven, Michigan. We go there a lot. I'm going there soon. And I would encourage every listener, just Google it. Look up South Haven, Michigan. Look at the breakwaters. They're two big piers. There's a lighthouse at the end of it. And when you see the breakwaters, you're going to really start to understand, oh, I get the channel, the river, that's safety, the transitional period of when you're going through these two breakwaters. And then what is it like when you get out? Because when you get out beyond those breakwaters, it gets scary. It just does. So go look it up, because if everybody can get the image in their mind, we're going to build on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. You can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.